Yo, yo, yo. How's everybody doing? Hopefully, everybody's good tonight. We're going to touch up on some more Path of Exile 2 news. We're going to go over the skill tree. Just to simplify things, if people are confused, it looks intimidating. We're going to kind of show a brief example how the skill tree works. Can show a brief image here. How we're going to break down the tree. So you have your full skill tree for your class here. So you're going to have it broken up into certain sections. So if you're going to be a Sorc, or a monk, or a warrior, duelist isn't in. So ranger, a lot of these. So you got your dexterity, strength, dexterity, intellect, dex, intelligence, strength. So when you're starting your character here, you're going to branch out upward, and then that you're going to get a lot of those nodes for that character. Obviously, we don't have a druid and duelist in it yet, but it's broken up like this. So say if you're a Sorc, you're starting here, you have to start upwards, and then you can start speccing your nodes if you want to into different areas. Say you want to kind of start getting into dexterity with the sorceress, which intellect, dexterity, you can start working your way up, and then go over to the monk skills. Or if you want strength, you can work your way up and then start using your nodes over to strength. So that's kind of how it's going to be broken up. So you're going to start, say this is just an example as a Sorc. You're going to be cut off like this. So any nodes you'll kind of see as the skill tree when you play the game for the first time, you'll see a lot of the skills are going to be Sorc related or witch, and it'll be in this pie shape here. Or if you're a warrior, you're going to see it's going to be branched out this way. Here's a quick video breaking it down from Dreamcore. If you haven't seen this, it's going to be very helpful for you. So just check it out and see what you think for yourself. It really helped me, and it simplified things. It's very useful.
Things that make it very confusing, and I'm going to do this, probably be wrong. I have not played Path of Exile in quite a bit of time, so I apologize, but I will be able to hit this on a high level for you so you can at least understand roughly what's going to be changing and how it's going to change. So for starters, the tree starts in these locations. Right here, here, and here. They have whole entirely different start locations, and you have a class that will then dictate where that start is, right? So if I switch back to Templar, it starts over here. If I go to Shadow, it goes over to here. Now, within that, you then have bunch of different passive nodes.
He's showing Path of Exile 1 at the moment, but
you across the tree.
Just kind of breaking it down. They'll get into Path of Exile 2 here.
Not your keystone, but your not your mastery, because that's another one as well. Your notable passives, which is again just some sort of passive that gives you a pretty particular benefit in one direction or another. I'll go ahead and just click around here till we get to what I'm going to talk about, which is over here. This is a mastery. So basically, you will then get a mastery which will increase something from this list based off of other parameters, so on and so forth. I'm not going to get too much into it. Just want to bring that up. And as you then push forward, you have your keystones.
This is just giving you a good
huge guild
brief
one.
breakdown.
Again, it is some sort of drastic change to the way the character operates. This one cannot recover energy shield to above armor. 3% of physical damage prevented from hits recently is regenerated as energy shield per second. So you have that big one. So you have 4 different nodes that we've talked about, right? Your general passive, your notable, your keystone, your mastery, and then lastly, you have a jewel socket where you're going to socket a jewel into it, and it will give you your benefits. For those of you who are coming from Diablo 4, you know that's to be typically associated with the word glyph. It's way different in Path of Exile, but it's the easiest analog I can make for you. So that is the system as it is. And another big portion of the system is going from, let's just say the Templar over here down to whatever this is, whatever, I don't know which one it is, right over here. This is the warrior, I think. You would take these attribute nodes, which is kind of like the highway of what we will have in 2. But what you should know about this is these are set attribute points. This is strength. This is intelligence. This is strength. One of these is going to be dexterity somewhere along the line. Well, maybe not one of these is, but dexterity is another one of them. And the tree itself is divided up, right? It's like, I think like this is strength. This is like intelligence area, and this is dexterity, and they all kind of mix together. So it's like, okay, if I'm going to go with intelligence, I'm going to go up here. If I'm going to go with strength, I'm going to go over here. If I'm going to go with dexterity, it's going to be over here. So the entire tree in and of itself is split up in that regard. So if I wanted to be a hypothetical here, and again, I don't know Path of Exile builds and stuff enough to speak to this, but if I wanted to be a strength using character, but I wanted to use more dexterity for whatever reason, I would need to push through the center of the tree to get over to here to get some benefits from dexterity. To just make that as lame and as easy to access as possible. Now, though, of course, there are ascendancy nodes, and there's going into that whole process, but that has to do with build complexity, which I have another another video working on. So that is your Path of Exile 1 passive tree, and those are the different node types of this tree, and it is why it is so confusing. Your masteries and your passives and your
He's going to simplify it though,
and then using this lane to get from different locations.
If you're new to Path of Exile, this is going to be very helpful.
Weird. But
kind of when you
let's take a look at the Exile 2 tree and see how it's both similar but also different. So swapping over to this, we have the Path of Exile 2 passive tree. And I'm using Photoshop to do this because it's going to be the best and easiest way for me to illustrate things, because I am not the best at Premiere or After Effects in editing. So we talked about all the different node types from Path of Exile 1. We had the minor node, we had the notable, we had the keystone, we had the mastery, and then we had the jewel. That's 5 different node types. Here, in this game, it's a little bit different. So first off, let's scroll in here. And let's take a look at some stuff. So for one, as you can see, we have kind of what's set up here. And this is from the Reddit. This is all subject to change. None of this is concrete fact, of course. This is all going to be different once the game goes live. So when we take a look at this, we have, and I'll put this to like a red real quick. We have a couple nodes to take a look at. We have just your simple minor node that's like right there and right there. Those are your standard minor nodes that we had before. But now we have the notables, which are here, here, here. Any of these like kind of squarish looking gilded borders, those are your notable passives. Notable passives this time around too are a little bit different. They don't respond the same way as POE1. It doesn't really matter because I'm just trying to get you to understand this. And then we have our keystones. Keystones look just like they did in the previous one, where it's more of a like gilded circular icon, like this one right there is our keystone, stuff like that. So you can see that's our 3 primary nodes. That's all you really need to worry about. And then we have jewel slots, which are like right here. Jewel slots, they'll socket a jewel into them. They'll give you bonuses. It'll help out with certain things. It's a lot easier to understand. And what you also see is these little clusters are not nearly as dense as the previous tree. The previous tree is a lot more compact, or I'm sorry, not compact. It's a lot denser because there's so much stuff per quote unquote square inch than there is here. A lot of these have a lot of minor nodes that connect you to notable passives that give you bonuses in line with.
If anyone's new watching this channel, we're just going over here briefly. It's basically a beginner's guide to anyone new to Path of Exile. So we're just going to go over like the new skill tree and how, based on what character you pick. Right now he's running like a Deadeye. So he's going to start speccing over this way, and then he'll get more into specifics on, this is mainly dexterity. But as I showed you before here, it'll break it up into sections here. You'll see kind of how it all works out. Be pretty easy though. Yo, Red Sengor 21. How's it going, buddy? Hopefully you're having a good night. We're just going over basic stuff here for Path of Exile 2, the skill tree. We're going to get into some other stuff. So anybody that isn't, say you're coming from Diablo over to Path of Exile, this is going to be some very useful information. It's going to be like simplified breakdown of the skill tree and other mechanics in the game.
The stuff you want. On top of that too,
it's a very good video.
6 kind of starting locations here.
So see how you got
And these
six
starting
nodes
locations are going
within
to
this circle.
be dictated upon your starting class.
So
if you're
monk,
a ranger or a huntress, you're going to start right here. If you're a warrior or a marauder, you're going to start right here. And those are going to branch out in the directions. You don't have a
and then monk is over here.
Class.
This one.
So you have the same general tree that you're working off of, but you'll work again. If I'm just looking at a ranger and a huntress, you'll kind of work within this location. And Max Roll has a really good picture of this divided like this. You can see that the entire passive tree is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 separate areas. 3 primary things of strength, dexterity, and intelligence. And then all this overlaps into a large Venn diagram. This area up here is intelligence unfair.
Yo. Thank you for the follow. Ryzen. Thank you, buddy.
So as we push into
side, we'll kind of rewind this a little bit. This is very good information if you're new coming over to Path of Exile.
1, 2, 3.
So again, it's going to be like kind of divided into sections based on your class. So for myself, I'm going to be starting as a monk invoker. So I'm going to be starting here, and then I'm going to be branching outwards. And then he'll get into specifics here. This is a very good video.
A rather unfair observation.
Hello.
As we have also developed
Red Sengor. Am I saying that right? Red Sengor? Hopefully I'm saying that right. Thank you very much for the follow. Both of you guys, thank you very much. So again, this kind of gives you a brief idea how the skill tree is going to work.
3, 4, 5, 6 separate areas. 3 primary things of strength, dexterity, and intelligence. And then all this overlaps into a large Venn diagram. This area up here is intelligence intermixed with either strength on this side or dexterity on this side. And then that kind of reflects down on this region, right? So as we push into our Templar or Druid, we have intelligence and strength. Our strength...
Obviously, we don't have Templar and Druid, but...
strength and Dex, Mercenary and Duelist.
This would be Mercenary.
And Ranger. Int and Dex would be Shadow and Monk. And then lastly, that Int would be Sorceress and Witch. So the passive tree is divided up, just like it was.
We're doing a poll also so to do that,
navigate these locations.
Exclamation mark, vote, and then pick your class.
We had attribute points.
Curious what you guys are thinking for starting off
little attribute points that would bring us
the new Path of Exile League.
They were locked to specific attribute points.
Early
It
access.
is not that way this time. Now we have the attribute highway, which is this. It's
okay. This is very
3 rings here coincide with the pattern that you can see right here. That kind of branches around and connects, branches around and connects, and branches around and connects. Each one of those minor nodes gives you an attribute of your choosing versus a set one. So even if I'm down over here in dexterity and I choose one of these little attribute nodes, I can get intelligence.
Ooh, which?
Or maybe I get strength.
Nice
whatever
pick.
I want for the build I have in mind.
Nice.
It makes this a lot more approachable because I don't need to think.
What are you thinking for which? What ascendancy are you going? Are you thinking Infernalist? Or you go into that demon form? Then you have Hellhounds that kind of take your damage. That looks pretty cool. Or you're just going to do a minion build?
So hard about the specific things I'm choosing. Another thing too is to respec any node that you've selected, you just simply spend some gold to do so. In Path of Exile 1, you need a specific resource. It's like the Orb of Reflection or whatever. So you could actually end up completely tanking your character because you chose a node that would give you a keystone. The keystone completely breaks your character and you can't respec because you don't have the resource to do it. This time around, you just simply spend some points, you respec, you're good to go. So this kind of then breaks out. We looked at this highway, right? Well, this highway then takes a look at this. This is the kind of breakout of how...
Okay, so this is going to be very useful. So when you're starting with your class, say for myself, I'm going to be a monk. So I'm going to venture out this way. So your general, you're gonna spec your nodes into this general area. This is just a kind of like the radius you're going to be. You're going to spec out this way. And then say if I want to get some nodes from a sorceress, I want like lightning nodes or like something like that, then I'm going to start speccing outwards over into the sorceress range, which this is going to be like kind of your focus on your skills, how you want your ascendancy class to kind of start speccing into. It's very cool though.
Passive tree works.
This is where builds are going to get crazy.
Right here,
a lot of customization.
General passive skills that even if you are, say, a huntress over here and you want to go into step over here and for a Templar, it's at least going to be somewhat beneficial generally across the character.
Ooh,
then you start to focus
that'd be awesome.
on specific
an infernal witch fire and frost minion build. That's going to be cool.
Style of play.
Hell yeah, dude.
Center.
I'd be very curious to see how that plays.
And then as you push out into this red ring, are specialized. You are now in the
that should be a lot of fun though. That'd be a good build.
That are going to put you in a very
you just got to get the right nodes and kind of theory craft it.
So if I'm going to kind of look at trajectory for
excuse me,
ranger, and maybe I'm going to say, what,
Alex Pox, how's it going?
Poison abilities. Okay, well I'm now.
What's your first pick? My first pick is going to be a monk invoker. So I'm going to actually go into the invoker side of the ascendancy. And then I'm going to start kind of custom building it as I branch out. And then I'm going to customize it and get into some like witch and, not witch, I should say sorc abilities. Because how monk works, it's like dexterity and intelligence. So I can actually dabble and get some, intelligence from the sorc's passive abilities and get some of their good nodes for my monk. Because I'm going to go like cold damage, I'm thinking, for my invoker. And as well, guys, if you didn't know, when you do pick your ascendancy for your class, you can't change it. So that's kind of a thing where you pick your ascendancy and then you're locked into it for the rest of the game. Mind over matter and EB, you thinking? I think mind over matter is going to be pretty good, but that isn't mind over matter. Yeah, actually, I forget. Is mind over matter part of the other ascendancy, like the Chayula? As far as I know, with Invoker, like if it is mind over matter on that one, I think it's on both, but there was something about the cooldown, if that actually works the way I think it's going to, if you can spec more cooldown on it, then you can use that ability in your ascendancy against bosses. And if you can keep proccing that, it stacks your damage. So that'd be pretty cool. What character are you thinking, Alex? Are you going monk as well, or different pick?
Location. I have no idea where poison section is. Well, now I want to use poison shots with my bow and arrow, and I'm assuming that's this because it looks like a bow and arrow. I'm going to go here. So that kind of dictates the path that I go. You can be anything you want in this because your class isn't so important to your capabilities, because your skills are not bound to the class. They're bound to the weapons. What is important from your class are where you start on this passive tree and what your ascendancies are. That is it. That's the only thing that really matters. The rest is just whatever weapons and skills you want to use on whatever character you want to use them. So now that we've done all this, how does this really make it a lot easier to approach? Well, let's take a look. We've zoomed back in. Let's assume that we started as a ranger, and I want to focus on the capabilities of a hypothetical Templar or Druid, which is over here in this location, right? Well, I can take...
Which we don't have a Templar or Druid right now.
Going all the way around, all these little blips in red. And it's going to bring me up towards whatever this is up here with Templar/Druid. So I can then leverage into any of those passive abilities along the way, the notable passives.
Can be anything, though.
Everything in this
he could start specking into a warrior.
General, right? So I know that anything I'm picking up here is not going to really throw my character off. We're going to get... Well, in Path of Exile 1, we had 123.
Do you want to stay in the general area when you're going to a different
leveling up,
class?
Doing quests, what have you.
For specking.
I don't know the max number here, but if I were to simply choose only these red blips, it's 28 red blips. So assuming I didn't get any passive skill points from quests or what have you, that's only 28 levels out of 100 levels. So that's only a quarter of our total investment as a character. It's not that heavy of an investment to get over to this direction. It's far easier and a lot more concise to do so, where we're going to pick up a lot of notable passives that maybe we don't use, maybe we do use, who knows what they are. There's no way to tell right now.
That was my second choice.
Right now is pretty much
Sorcerer Stormweaver.
But
I think it's going to be very strong.
Okay, we've gone over here.
Overcharge.
Well, maybe I didn't want to focus so hard. Well, okay, I can go this route.
Let's see if you...
This is another
see where I'm going.
Highway, right?
Oh, trust me, I know. I know exactly. That was going to be my second option.
Every single one of these.
That's going to be an overpowered
attribute highway
build.
Node, meaning that
I know exactly what you're thinking.
Every time I select it, it's just going to give me
like a ball lightning or
points. Either 10 dexterity, 10 strength, or 10 intelligence.
I was thinking ball lightning.
So maybe I want to be a ranger that specializes in Templar abilities, and I want to use both strength and dexterity. Well, now, compared to Path of Exile 1, where maybe I'm going to take an attribute point that I don't want. Well, and I'm recording this live on stream. Someone said that it's no longer 10, it's 5. So this is 5 attribute points. Well, now I can focus on strength and dexterity because I'm going to get all the strength and dexterity I want from each one of these blue nodes, and it's 27 versus the 28 of all of these red nodes. You can see it's a lot easier to move through this tree. And I think when you take a look at this tree from this angle, it can make you want to vomit because you're like, dude, what the hell do you expect me to do with this many little blips? But when you really kind of break it down to a bite size, if you've played any game recently, this isn't too foreign of a construct for a talent tree. If you played World of Warcraft, the most recent DLC, it looks just like this. If you've played Diablo 4 and you've dealt with a glyph board, it's not too far off. If you've played the survival game Enshrouded, it looks just
it's pretty similar, really.
This. So
just laid out differently.
Confusing. And for me, I was like, I don't know if I really want to learn this to explain people. I'm not smart. It took me about 1 or 2 articles of understanding to go, oh, it's actually a lot simpler. They're taking 10 years of development, cramming it into a brand new system, or at least not even a brand new system, but a revamped, updated system that is far easier to approach. And hopefully now you can see that it's a lot easier to take a look at once you break down how this is split apart. So how does this work for our weapon sets? So we've seen these 2 branches that I've created, right? Our red and our blue. Well, weapon sets now help to add to this. Let's assume that our total amount of passive skill points is 100 that you get as a player. Well, now in Path of Exile 2, weapon sets are crucial because weapons are what give us our skills. And those weapons, maybe they are focused on elemental, or maybe it's a quarterstaff because you're playing a monk. And I, as a monk, want to leverage lightning abilities or frozen abilities, or maybe I'm a ranger, I'm using poison abilities or physical abilities, whatever it is. Every weapon set gives you 20 extra passive.
It's very interesting, Alex.
Bound solely to that
overcharge.
What I mean by that
look at what overcharge gem does and see how it synergizes with strike twice with the ascendancy. Okay, I'll check that out. Kind of curious on that.
To put in, you'll get these passive skill points.
Look at overcharge on the Stormweaver
that you then invest solely attached to that weapon set. So I know that we've got a ton of colors going on here. Let me make it a little bit easier for you and turn off this red. These are the only passive skill points we've invested in the blue. So green is our weapon set 2. Well, you know what? I picked up another weapon and I'm going to focus on one element of damage, hypothetical fire, and another element of damage, hypothetical ice. So now if I switch to weapon set 2, I'm going to have these.
I'm just going to check something real quick. Sorry, guys. I'm going to see. What exactly you're thinking here. Oh, it's in the ascendancy though, isn't it? I can. If I can. If I have. Here, I'll keep this video on here for a minute.
Passives, and these will be shut off when weapon set 2 is active. What's important to note though is that any skill that you choose that chooses a specific weapon will be instantaneous, meaning that if I'm using a sword, I press a button, okay, well, that sword's going to use weapon set 2. And then I press another button and it jumps back to my bow and arrow, that's going to use weapon set 1, whatever I have it set to, right? It'll instantaneously use these as needed as per the skill that is appropriate to it. So these are all my one for weapon set 1. These are ones for weapon set 2, and they'll jump across as needed for the skill that it coincides. So this gives you flexibility within your build to have you say, okay, I'm pushing through this entire tree where I have all this active, but I want to take advantage of all these things over here because this is what gives me that weapon's additional capabilities, additional strength, additional bonuses, whatever it is. So I think that it's really hard to understand at first blush, but once you really kind
actually
of play
very
through
good
its paces, and I think the hardest thing for anyone to understand right now, if you're coming to this brand new, is that you have no context on how this actually applies to the video game. You've only heard exciting things from people that are Path of Exile content creators or people that are maybe put some time into it to learn it. So you're like, okay, well, I don't understand it because you don't have practical knowledge of the game, how it actually applies to it. So really just think of it basically as, if you want to use a Diablo analog, think of it like you're playing a necromancer in Diablo. And if you want to use maybe a barbarian's war cry, you're tapping into that ability very quickly and using the skill points from that barbarian while still playing a necromancer. I know that's still a convoluted example, but basically you're quickly popping into a set of passives that you've created for yourself to quickly turn those passives on and off. So at that, though, it brings our video here to a close. I wanted to break down this passive tree because it's the thing that is holding the most people up on the game. I myself, too, when playing Path of Exile 1, I'm like, I did a Vampire Blender build. That, for those OGs that played it like way back in like 2013, 14, that was a pretty good build back then. And I didn't make the build. I looked the build up online because I didn't understand it. After delving through it a little bit more, it's a little bit easier for me to understand, but I think Path of Exile 2's build is just going to be so much more accessible because they've said, we want builds to be viable all the way through the game. And yeah, there's the possibility to go very try hard and get a really good sweaty build by going really hard in the paint on certain directions and doing certain things. That's always going to exist in action RPGs, hack and slash, in video games as a whole. But don't defeat yourself from trying this game out or being interested in this game because this tree scares you so much. This tree is a lot more accessible than it's ever been. And just by simply kind of looking at it, we don't know what the in-game kind of tutorial is to break this down to new players. It might be way better explained than I'm about to right now. And me not being able to use
100% restoration.
Using Photoshop
As we have also
hey,
interest in the
thank you very much. G5
you know, you've been playing this game
H1 Rec
go ahead and share some
4T.
information. Say, hey, you know what?
It's a crazy name.
What he said was right, but here's the things that are different. Here's the things that maybe help you out.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the follow, buddy.
The same thing.
Hope you're having a good night.
Angle is what really allows you to click with information more so than most. Hearing, hey, you know what?
Also, guys, if you're new to the channel, we're going to do a Path of Exile 2 early access key giveaway this Saturday at we're going to start it at 12 p.m. Eastern, and then we'll finish the giveaway and announce the winner at 2 p.m. Eastern. So as long as you make it in between that amount of time, I'm going to be on streaming at 12 p.m. Eastern, and then we'll wrap it up, announce the winner at 2 p.m. Eastern. So you got a few hours to actually get into the channel and enter in the draw. So we'll do ! enter on Saturday, and then you'll get entered for a chance to win the early access key.
It's like this. You might not vibe with that explanation. Having someone else explain to you a different way is really going to help. So take a look at all the other Path of Exile content creators out there. There's
as we have
tons
also
of them,
developed
and they all have
interest
their
Oh.
own take on this because they've
Thank you very much. Thanks for the follow.
For the last
All
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10
Keppel,
years. The game has been out
think.
for a chunk of time.
Am I saying that right?
I promise once you really
Keppel?
get through this, you'll see
All
how
Keppel?
much fun
Thank you very much.
is linked to the complexity of the builds in this without them being too over your head. In the next video, we're going to discuss build complexity, how it pertains to the weapons and the skill gems and then the support gems.
No, you're
how
not
it's going
late.
to be a really cool process. to
Giveaway
make a
will be
character that is
Saturday,
truly
November
up to you,
30th.
right? You are making a character based off of a class. The only thing that's going to matter, like I said, is where you
bulky
start
PL.
on here,
Gotcha.
and then what your
Bulky.
ascendancy classes
My
are
bad.
going
Thank
to
you very
be,
much for the
because
follow.
ascendancy classes are
Oh,
going to be that
from
true
Poland.
flavor.
Welcome in from Poland.
But if you have any comments or anything
Very
you
far.
want to add to it, let it be known in the comments
I'm in
section below.
Canada,
But
so
as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.
So hopefully that kind of simplifies things for you guys a little bit. Again, this kind of shows you the core of your skill. Then it breaks up into the different dexterity, intelligence. For monk will be over here, warrior over here. So when you start, you'll kind of show you the next. So when you start, say as a warrior, for example, you'll kind of go out this way in the general area, and then you'll get a lot of your warrior nodes. And then if you want to venture off into a different part of the skill tree, you kind of want to stay within this proximity. You'll kind of know where it is, because you'll see a lot of nodes that are like, mana and, basic skills. So you want to kind of, if you're a warrior and you want to go over to, get some dexterity for whatever reason, for example, or you want to get some intelligence, do something crazy with, your slams and deal electricity. You'll kind of venture your way around this way, get the basic nodes till you get to intelligence. And then you'll come back over here, and then you'll start focusing on your build within this yellow diameter. And then when you specialize in your class, then it'll be within this diameter here. So that's just like kind of a brief breakdown. Just kind of nice. Hopefully that helps you guys a little bit. I know it's still a little bit complex, but it's very easy once you kind of understand it. So for me, monk, I'm going to breach out this way. And then if I want to get some Sork abilities for like lightning, then I'll start speccing over here along this line. And then I'll pick up some nodes, and then I'll start branching back out this way to focus on my class, which will be Invoker. And then you specialize in your main nodes and stuff up in the red part of the circle. So we'll check out another video here. This is important guides and tips you need to know for early access. I found it very helpful.
We have a lot more to talk about and digest, and there was a fantastic interview I want to highlight with DM and Ghazi. This was held with Jonathan Rogers in a kind of podcast style, filled with ideal questions and insanely open answers. Jonathan said during it that maybe he shouldn't say this or that, but he just does anyway. So I'd really recommend the videos put out by Ghazi and DM about it. And they're both going to be good creators to follow for POE2 in general, so please go check them out. I'm not going to be referencing, say, even 20% of everything covered in those videos. But either way, that interview and lots of other information coming out has answered quite a few questions that we have about this early access and the game at large. Like, for example, I stated in my all classes video that we've only actually been shown Druid with bear form, but I'm sure it has more, but what and how many? Well, Jonathan confirmed in that talk that the Druid will actually have primary forms.
Is Scion coming to PO? No, it's not.
So
well, I shouldn't say that. I'm not too sure. I don't think it is.
Ongoing reveals this week. Let's start with some general things to know, and then we'll jump.
I think it's a duelist, Druid,
Firstly,
and I forget what there's a few other ones. I can bring them up for you after here. Dreamcore got inside. Yeah, he did, dude. Dreamcore is the one that got a lot of valuable information for a lot of content creators and just people in general. He ended up getting, honestly, I think when he was at that event in LA, that's specifically what he was going there to do. To just kind of look at the skill trees and look at all the nodes, probably one on each character, and just, you know what I mean, just try to get as much possible information as he could. So it's actually helping out the community a lot to get a little bit of information before going into it, blind. And as well, people that are on Xbox, they can actually already pre-download the game. So I know there's a lot of people speculating that they're going to data mine the game, because everything's basically right there, since all the data for the game has been kind of pre-uploaded to Xbox. So we'll see. There'll probably be more information closer to launch, early access launch. So Be interesting to see if it gets data mined or not then.
For myself in the UK, that means it's going
Yeah,
live
Dreamcore
at
came out with a
7
lot of good
PM
information.
that day. Now, in terms of early access and the league they're doing for that, that means a couple special things. It's planned.
Yeah, Bulky, I'm not too sure. I'll double check here.
Running, but based on how things have gone,
I don't think it is.
All that, I would say it could be noticeably longer.
That won't be for 6 months out when the actual game fully releases.
Interestingly, we will get to keep these early access characters in the future though, but maybe not in the way you might have hoped. There's the Standard League, which is kind of the permanent and default league. If you're coming from Diablo 4, you'd view the Standard League similar to, say, the Eternal Realm. However, these early access characters are never going to be part of the
I don't think it's confirmed yet either for the other 6.
Characters will stay in an early access league.
All of them anyways.
Accessible after launch, but will be separate from standard. On that note, the official webpage for early access is here and updated, full of specific information you might want to check out, whether that's lore, stuff about the 6 classes and their ascendancies, information about, say, the new skill gem system, the passive tree, the dual spec stuff, equipment examples are there, various endgame references, and it's all pretty easy to take a look at and get a good understanding of stuff very quickly. Now, one thing in regards to those classes, though, is that...
Okay, I can confirm that it looks like it's not going to be in it. Bulky. From what I see here, it's going to be, obviously we know it's a mercenary, monk, ranger, sorceress, warrior, witch. Then we're going to see the huntress, druid, templar, shadow, duelist, and then marauder. That looks like the 12 in total classes that we'll have on full launch. And that's going to be 6 months after early access releases. So it'll be sometime in like June.
We finally get a proper look at the new class selection screen.
Hopefully that helps you.
Which, to be fair, was teased, I think, about 5 years ago now originally, when POE2 was first announced. So it's pretty cool to see that still there after all this time, with the general footage in the trailer. But it's a pretty brutal way to introduce your character. You're basically choosing who's going to survive the hanging, just one, or in a darker light, who's gonna die. If you guys want to learn all the specific details we've seen for all the classes and their ascendancies so far though, I want to recommend this Reddit post by Selva Paluda. They took the time to write out every reveal and bit of information shown for these, so I think it's great to refer to if you want. Now, during the big early access livestream, we learned what's coming for this initial version. As you can see, we have Acts 1 to 3 are going to be available immediately, but then we're going to have to replay those again on a harder difficulty called Cruel. It will just make things harder, but it is ultimately a filler concept just for now. They plan to release Acts 4 to 6 eventually, but because they wanted Endgame to be more buffed out and ready for early access, that's what they chose to work on instead. So they expect us to reach about level 65 to begin their Endgame systems, which would be at the end of completing Act 3 a second time, but on Cruel. But when the game's fully out or whenever they get it out, this would instead just be at the end of Act 6. Beyond that, insanely, we can expect a pretty big endgame in the immediate early access from level 65 to 100, which, as you might imagine, is going to be an insane amount of content to engage with immediately.
No, I played a bit of POE1.
Stream, the endgame seems pretty varied and fleshed out.
I played a little bit. Not crazy too much, but mostly came from Diablo.
You'll find different bits.
Played POE1 for
various leagues,
they
ran in POE1.
probably under a year, off and on.
It's going to be a hand that opens a
so I know the gist of it, basic
out these hordes of demons,
fundamentals of it. It's going to be a little bit different than POE1. I see a lot of Last Epoch kind of combination within POE2. So they've changed up a fair amount of how the mechanics are and a bit of the end game. They have some of the things that are obviously still the same, but
another mechanic you might find is Delirium, where you find a kind of mirror and you touch it and spread mist.
A little different.
Stay within that mist to maintain the nightmare that's going on.
What about yourself, Alex?
More monsters for more rewards. But if you overstay your welcome, you're going to regret it because the monsters get stronger the longer you hold the mist. Another one is the rituals. You'll start and defeat enemies attached to it, and that will feed the altar. When you activate the ritual, that revives them, so you have to kill them again. And then there's multiple ritual sites. So each one you go to, you revive all of the monsters you killed so far, making it harder and harder and more risky. But you keep building up called tribute.
Got 4K hours and still feel intimidated. Yeah, I know it is intimidating for sure.
Challenged by the restless dead.
It's a lot of information this round.
Which when exploded give you massive bonuses.
This time over with Path of Exile 2. A lot of new information.
so you need to be careful.
But it makes it fun. I like it. I like going in a bit blind.
This expedition worth more because the cost
It just makes it that more exciting.
could be too much for you to handle.
And as I go along, I'll kind of figure out the build that I'm going to work towards.
Each of these has its own skill tree that you can modify the experience with to make something.
This is something I like. Is like with the end game, you have different skill trees in the end game based off of the end game content. Like Breach, I believe, is over here to the left. So the more you play Breach, then you're going to start speccing nodes into the Breach skill tree. And you got like an Expedition one, Pinnacle one, Ritual, Delirium one. So it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Specific rewards based on what you want. So pretty cool stuff. But on the note of the Atlas maps, let's start referencing some details.
Not intimidated.
As Jonathan explained,
Gotcha.
you can only die once in a map or it's lost. But you'll have 6 portals to make 6 trips total back to your stash to kind of recoup. Generally, people seem pretty positive about this tougher rule. That
it's gonna be fun, dude.
Consequences to dying in that context. My favorite take about this is how it adds challenge for a softcore character without actually deleting your character, such as having a hardcore character.
I'm sure, yeah, like anyone that has like 1,000+ hours into it, at least you know the fundamentals of the game, so it should be pretty easy. This will be, I actually think PO1's harder than Path of Exile 2.
Still getting the rewards. This feels like
they actually simplified POE2.
To the end game, Jonathan
surprisingly,
the crafting bench was apparently cut, at least for now. We've heard something about this before, so it's not exactly new.
I like
news,
this.
But it is something that he wanted to state, I guess, for this early access, that's indeed a thing. He suggests it might return as a
the layout of the Atlas too. It's basically just like infinite possible, just an infinite map and keep going as far and long as possible, different areas to explore.
Strong boxes were shown as painfully slow to engage with. So much so that I've seen people discuss how they're planning to skip these and never use them already. Thankfully, he said that with
he fixed that probably.
Openings being shown in that way, it's going to be much faster than we saw, which is a smart choice and all. But for me, the main thing there is it's great to see
like slow
how
animation, but
that type of response and then instantly dealing with it. Moving on to the topic of classes, Jonathan said in that talk, the next 2 classes coming to the early access are going to be Druid and Huntress. And he says they'll be relatively soon. Now, obviously, we have no clue what relatively soon really means, but it
wish they made it more complicated, easier to find loopholes and loopholes and exploits.
3 primary forms.
I think there's still going to be loopholes and exploits, but
human and then the bear form.
Just a matter of time somebody will figure it out.
One special form,
but
it's good to have
I wish it was a little more complicated as well. Yeah.
Next, in the form of Druid and Huntress in general.
I mean, but
makes sense because we've actually seen a reasonable amount of, say, Druid.
I mean, again, for somebody from POE 1 to 2, you're gonna have a different kind of mindset than other people coming from, say, like Diablo, where that game is very simplified. So this makes it a little more intimidating. But at least like it's kind of more user friendly to people that aren't too familiar with Path of Exile in general.
The longest 4 would be the 4 we've not been shown much of at all. So
it's a bit of pros and cons, I guess. But I feel I get what you're saying.
Wait, the longest 4. Now, in regards to our ascendancy options, you'll know that you have a unique skill tree for the subclass that you picked. You earn it by doing that first ascend, right?
And again, when you pick your ascendancy, you cannot change it. So when you ascend,
it was confirmed in this talk with Jonathan that we're going to have
to that ascendancy that you pick on your class. That's it. You're locked in.
That might help you though, because you could take a look
cannot change it.
Shown and get an idea or make a plan of how many points you're going to spend where. Though obviously,
unless if you want to make another character, then that's the only way.
On with those skill trees. Other ascend related things mentioned would be, say, for the warrior subclass, Warbringer. The special Jade Heritage ability is more controllable than we were shown. The one where you turn into the Jade statue, it begins to build up stacks of Jade to begin mitigating damage. It turns out you can cancel it early and manage that how you want, which is a nice bit of detail. While for, say, the Sorcerer subclass, Chronomancer, the ultimate command ability, which pauses time around you, he confirmed that that time stop will not freeze your friends, so it just seems the enemies near you will be affected. Both of these details are logical and all, but it's good to have that cleared up. Other quick, nice confirmations during this talk were things like how loot fields.
I'm going to be running hard on launch, so as long as we can get in and no server issues, then
how an in-game build planner
I'll be running. So if there's anybody that is looking for somebody to kind of get on and play with, I'm your guy.
Have a chance to do it in game when it's
Or else I'll
here.
kind of be running
Another one would be how there's plans
with
to
myself
work
and one
to allow
other
for
probably.
quick swapping between, say, PC UI to controller UI.
I'll be
when you're on keyboard
I'll be
or
on for the long haul.
controller. But unfortunately, that's not going to be there at the launch.
It'll be fun in the
of early
beginning though, the
access
first
or
part of the
later.
campaign.
I've never actually properly played an ARPG on a controller other than bits of Diablo 4. I always find the gameplay part really nice, it feels good, but say using inventory and any UI stuff, I find that much more slow and clunky and annoying. But I'm sure I'll still give it a try, at least to see how it works. Oh, and lastly, it was said that there will be more teasers leading up to the early access launch. So we can expect even more information and stuff to look at, even in the coming days before we get playing. But yeah, I'll leave
Next
it there
week we'll
for
get
today.
more
That's just
information,
a
but
pile of stuff that I've learned since the first early access live stream day and things that I thought would be worth talking about. If there's anything you guys would like to add to these topics, then you can feel free to share it in the comments. But there's a ton more we're going to be talking about in the coming days.
yeah, there'll be a lot more information coming in the next probably, maybe day or two or next week. We still have it's not till next Friday, so we still got time. And we'll see also if anything gets data mined. I'm very curious. But that'll be December 6th, guys, again at 2 p.m. Eastern. If you're getting on for the early access.
You can ignore the cooldowns of your war cries. Let all that anger out.
This video is actually pretty informative if you're, just your passive skill tree nodes revealed.
9 days to go until we all log in.
Intelligence
and it's time for
area
another
deep dive.
POE2 passive tree
It's from
video.
Dream Core.
If you didn't know, I went to a POE2 event a few weeks back and was able to capture some of the passive skill tree, and I've been covering each section of the tree, discussing some of the more interesting nodes.
He's been the one kind
Today,
of
it's the
sharing a lot of the
intelligence area
nodes
the tree, where the witch and sorceress start.
when he was
Alright,
at the
let's begin
LA
with one
event,
of the
LA event there for
reoccurring
the
themes in this
alpha.
area of the tree, which is
game test.
modifiers to scale energy shield recharge. In yesterday's video, I talked about how the POE2 passive tree has much fewer options available for energy shield recovery, which is true, as there was no Ghost Reaver keystone in the version of the game that I played, and I also couldn't find any nodes for energy shield leech. However, access to scaling energy shield recharge has been largely increased, and no matter where you are in the intelligence section of the tree, you won't have to path very far to allocate some of these nodes. Keep in mind that energy shield recharge has a 4-second base delay before it begins in POE2, but nodes like convalescence will help with that, reducing recharge rate but allowing it to start much faster as a trade-off. Essence infusion, on the other hand, provides a huge increase to recharge rate, improving.
So again, this is the part of the intelligence tree, because as we looked before, there's a big pie shape. So this be like witch and sorceress within these nodes here.
the time you require to recover your ES back to full. Meanwhile, Dependable Ward and Rapid Recharge both have the same modifiers, and these are just solid boosts to Energy Shield Recharge, providing both of the stats you need to start recharging faster and recover more ES over time from this mechanic. There's also Refocus, which is going to be useful if you have high cast or attack speed to be able
Cast on
to
Ignite,
drop the start of
Shock
Energy
Freeze,
Shield Recharge
Elemental,
faster than it would have started naturally.
Invocation, and Raging Spirits with Essence. That sounds pretty badass.
However, it's important to mention that there is no Wicked
Dang, dude.
Keystone on the tree in the version that I played, so you won't have that option to be able to prevent damage from stopping your recharge. Okay, let's stick with Energy Shield for a moment and cover some of the nodes which will help you against any incoming stuns on builds that are more focused on ES than life. Stun threshold is based on maximum life by default, so
You're gonna
these
do
types
like
of builds typically
probably
need to find a way
flame
to
wall.
become immune to stuns, or have their stun threshold based on their ES instead of life in POE1. But in POE2, there's a lot more options available to solve this problem. For example, Dampening Shield, which grants a good chunk of increased maximum energy shield, and adds 12% of your maximum ES to stun threshold. So if you have 5000 energy shield, this modifier would add a flat 600 to your stun threshold. Hallowed provides more of this stat at 20% of maximum ES gained as additional stun threshold, but also helps you shake off a stun a bit faster as well. Then we have a few of the stronger nodes. Eldritch Will is one of only 3 or 4 nodes on the entire passive tree with increased maximum life. You get 3% each to life, mana, and energy shield, and once again, another 20% of max ES as added stun threshold. And self-mortification, which also grants 20% of max ES as added stun threshold, but also increases that stun threshold by 20% while you're on full life. This one is exceptionally good for an energy shield-based CI build where you're always
checking
on
it
full
out?
life to be able to fully benefit
curious what
from
you're
that
thinking here.
increased stun threshold.
Alex.
Alright, let's look at a few minion
Stormweaver,
nodes
so
on the
cast on
left
Ignite,
outer edge of the
Shock,
tree.
Freeze,
This
Elemental,
cluster here, firstly,
Invocation,
Light and
and Raging
Darkness, which
Spirits with
grants
Essence
20%
Harvest.
increased AoE to your minions and gives them a 10% chance to inflict Withered on hit. This is going to be really good to combo with some of those Chaos style abilities when you have minions that attack quickly or just when you have a lot of minions to hit enemies. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of this cluster is a more defensive minion node in Left Hand of Darkness, which grants 20% additional PDR and 23% Chaos Res to your minions. But in the middle of this cluster is possibly the most important minion node on the entire tree, Lord of Horrors, which makes minion skills have 12% reduced reservation. So you can either use more of them, or invest less into Spirit, or use any excess Spirit you do have to reserve other powerful buffs. Okay, let's take a quick look at this node here, Breath of Fire. There's also an equal node for each of the other elements here on this wheel, and each of the small nodes also grants 6% pen for their respective element. In general, penetration is much more accessible across the entire passive tree and is found in larger quantities, but there's a big reason for that. Because in POE2, penetration will no longer go into the negatives. This means that penetration has no effect against monsters that have no resistance to the type of damage you're dealing. Instead, it will be a tool to deal with monsters that do have resistance, such as bosses, but no longer a mechanic that is used as an excessive damage multiplier. Let's go back to Energy Shield for a moment and take a look at some of the largest increases to maximum ES on the tree, starting with Heavy Buffer. 40% increased max ES, and 10% reduced maximum life. It's interesting to see a lot of the stronger nodes having trade-offs like this, almost like a keystone.
See what you're saying
There's
here.
also Melding, which is the same, but with reduced mana instead of reduced life. Then there's Enhanced Barrier, which doesn't provide nearly as much increased maximum energy shield, but does grant 1% to all maximum elemental resistances, so that's a solid notable. And check out this one. Patient Barrier. 60% increased maximum energy shield. That is wild. If you can overcome that downside, this one is going to be insane value. Necromantic Talisman is a keystone located near the outer edge, which makes bonuses from your equipped amulet be applied to your minions instead of you. This is going to be ridiculous if that also includes any anoint that's on there. But otherwise, we're not too sure yet what sorts of modifiers will exist on amulets, so we'll have to wait and see for that. Another keystone at the outer edge of the tree is Whispers of Doom, which grants an extra curse at the cost of double the delay for curses to activate. This one will be a great keystone if you apply curses in ways that bypass the activation time, such as Blasphemy. Climate Change is Heat Shiver on the POE2 passive tree, that one's pretty cool. And Ice Walls is interesting. Ice crystals are a secondary mechanic similar to something like Jagged Ground or Aftershocks, where you can scale their effects to make those skills which interact with them more powerful. There's another notable next to this one which also reduces the life of ice crystals instead, if you want to go that route. Endless Blizzard is at the top of the tree, right at the outer edge, +1 to the level of all cold skills. That's going to be extremely valuable for a lot of Sork builds. And there's also Psychic Fragmentation, which grants a 24% chance for spells to fire 2 additional projectiles. That's really good, especially for something like Fireball, where the damage may overlap on explosions. Okay, we've saved the best till last, of course, and it's nice. A bunch of stat stacking stuff again.
The Fireball.
Your power is right at the top of the tree and grants 2% increased lightning damage per 10 intelligence. Now, the fact that this is lightning damage is crazy, considering we know that Intelligence is going to grant a lot more mana in POE2. It grants 2 mana per int, and yesterday we saw the Archmage Persistent buff shown off in the POE2 teaser, which combines incredibly well with this node. But if you want more reason to stack Intelligence and mana, look no further than Arcane Intensity, which grants 3% increased spell damage per 100 maximum mana with no cap. That's going to be kind of ridiculous how much increased damage you can get by combining these two notables on an intelligence stacker. And what about modifiers to scale maximum mana? Well, aside from the 3% max mana on the Eldritch Will node from earlier, I could only find two notables in the intelligence section of the tree. Mana Blessing near the Witch and Sork start, and Raw Mana closer to the outer edge of the tree. I know that there's also a few notables in the Int Strength portion of the tree, so while Mana didn't quite get the life treatment, it did get extremely limited compared to POE1. But there is one crazy keystone that we need to talk about at the end here, which doesn't really have anything to do with Int, but Mana, yes. Eldritch Battery is changed in POE2, and it now converts all of your energy shield into mana. This one is crazy, but there's a caveat. We know that conversion will work differently in POE2, at least on the damage side of things. We don't know if those mechanics will work the same for other conversion, but one would assume a uniform system across the game. And that would mean that energy shield converted to mana wouldn't remember
Eldritch Battery. Yeah,
and therefore it wouldn't be affected by modifiers to energy shield. In other words, you won't be able to scale the portion of energy shield converted into mana with modifiers to energy shield. Only mana modifiers would apply to it. And that's it. Some of the more interesting nodes on the intelligence aligned portion of the tree. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.
Pretty good information there. That's from Dreamcore. If you're kind of curious how the mechanics work, if you're new to Path of Exile 2, there's a brief demonstration on Leech, how Leech works.
Video. In the lead up to POE2's early access launch on December 6th, I'm covering the game's mechanics, how they work and how they differ from the same mechanics in Path of Exile 1 to create a resource that's useful for new players and veterans alike. You can check out the written guide, including the playlist for all of the Path of Exile 2 mechanics videos by following the link at the top of the video description below. This video is all about Leech. Let's get into it.
So you're thinking until then.
Leech in Path of Exile is a mechanic that allows a character to recover a resource based on the damage they deal from a hit. But Leech does not interact with damage over time in any way. You can only leech based on the damage from a hit.
Oh.
The recovery from Leech is recovered over time by default. Now, the most common type of leech is Life Leech, which recovers life over time based on damage dealt, but there are also modifiers which exist to allow a character to leech mana or energy shield. Unlike in other videos in this series, I'm not going to fully explain how Leech functions in POE1 because it's possibly the most overcomplicated mechanic I've ever seen in any game. Coming from someone who enjoys complex mechanics, even I can agree that Leech in POE1 is completely overcooked, and to explain it in this video would go against the concept of concise mechanic introductions that this series is supposed to present. Instead, if you wish to learn exactly how Leech works in POE1, I'll direct you to check out this very good 68-minute breakdown by Sergeant Minor.
That's if you're going to
the TLDR of Leech in
Chayula.
POE1 is that it's based on the damage taken by a monster after mitigation, and this number is multiplied by the
That's not for Invoker, is it?
As we have also developed a keen interest
Thank you very much for the follow. Omni Black Demon, thank you very much for the follow, buddy. Appreciate it.
A character can have at any one time.
Thank you very much.
Instances are capped at a default maximum of 10% of the resource, and each can recover up to a default maximum of 2%
This is general
per second.
Leech, what it does, but it could be a little different in POE2.
Recovery per second based on the resource. By default, that's 20% of maximum
It's just a rough idea.
20% of maximum mana, or 10% of maximum energy shield per second. Now, that's Path of Exile 1.
Thank you again for the follow, though. I appreciate that.
To hear that in Path of Exile 2, Leech is being significantly simplified, to the point that there is now only two relevant stats. The percentage
the only
of
reason I
damage
went
a
Storm
character
Reaver
will
just
leech,
because one gem.
and a new mechanic in POE2,
Let's see what you're saying here,
leech
Alex.
resistance on monsters. The amount of resource a character leeches is based on the damage a monster takes from a hit after mitigation, multiplied by the sum of percentage of damage dealt leached as X resource that the character has.
Yeah, that's
That
nuts.
total is then multiplied against the monster's leech resistance modifier to provide a final total amount of recovery that will recover the resource over time. For example, let's say a character in early acts has 2% of physical attack damage leached as life and hits a monster with an attack ability. The monster takes 2,000 physical damage.
Yeah, if
from
it
this
stacks,
hit.
that's going to be insane,
so
dude.
the total leech amount is
If
40
it does.
life. The monster has 30% leech resistance, so the character recovers 28 life over time. Monster leech resistance is based on
that's gonna be
monster
insane.
level and will generally increase the further
If you can actually
progress in the
regenerate
game.
mana that quick, that's going to
This
be huge.
system is not designed to make leech ineffective against some monsters or bosses, and is instead intended to counter exponential damage increases that a character will ultimately experience over the course of progression, to present a somewhat balanced amount of leech at any one point of game progression. For example, comparing leech recovery in Act 1 to Act 6 should present a somewhat equal amount of leech relative to the character's total resource pool. The only information that we don't
It's
have
bad,
just yet
I'd
is
rather
exactly
go
how long a
Infernalist,
leech
yeah.
instance will last for by default. But based on the interview Zizaran did with Rishi and Jonathan, their answers about leech may suggest that a single leech instance will recover the amount of resource over 1 second. I'll link the time-stamped interview in the description below if you're interested. We also know that instant leech will exist in Path of Exile 2, based on the existence of the Vaal Pact Keystone, which makes all recovery from life leech instant, at the cost
Recover
of
50
preventing a
mana when a
character
minion
using life
from
loss.
supported skills dies. So each minion that dies, you're going to generate mana. That's huge. All right, so that's a little bit on life. So leeching. This one's going to be on damaging alignments, if you're not familiar.
Welcome to another Path of Exile 2 mechanics video. POE2's early access is launching on December 6th, and in this series I'm covering the game's mechanics, discussing how they function and how they differ from the same mechanics in Path of Exile 1, to create a resource that's useful for new players and veterans alike. You can check out the full series by following the link in the video description below. This video is all about damaging ailments. Let's get into it.
Games, and nothing more. I like it. I like your name. How's it going, brother? How's your night?
Damaging ailments in Path of Exile are comprised
Hopefully everybody's
of
going to have a
3
good
ailments,
Thanksgiving
each of
tomorrow.
which deal damage over time while in effect. These ailments are bleeding, ignite, and poison.
Bleeding, ignite, and
Bleeding is
poison.
inflicted by physical attack damage and deals physical damage over time.
What are you thinking for your first character on early access launch?
Physical hit
What are you thinking,
damage
games?
that inflicted the ailment per second for 5 seconds and does not stack. The damage dealt by bleeding triples to 210% per second while the target is moving. Ignite is inflicted
doesn't
by
have
fire
to
hit
die.
damage and deals fire
You can
damage over
refresh
time
minions.
at a magnitude of 90%
The way I make
of
it
the
is by
base
casting
hit
fire
damage
skills.
that inflicted the ailment per
That's
second
actually valid.
for 4 seconds and does not stack. Ignite is guaranteed to be inflicted by a hit of fire damage, which is also a critical hit. Poison is inflicted by physical and chaos hit damage and deals chaos damage over time at a magnitude of 30% of the base physical and chaos hit damage that inflicted the ailment per second, for 2 seconds, and stacks with no limit. There are many modifiers on the passive skill tree, on ascendancy notables, and on unique items which interact directly with these ailments. The more common modifiers increase ailment duration or improve a character's chance to inflict those ailments, but some modifiers can directly alter the default behavior of an ailment. For example, the Crimson Dance Keystone, which makes it so you can deal damage with up to 8 stacks of bleeding simultaneously on a single target, at the cost of dealing less damage and
I already had
losing
mine.
bleeding's inherent property
Hey,
of
you're Canadian
dealing
as well.
bonus damage while the target
I'm
is
Canadian
moving.
also.
Now, Path of Exile
I'm kind of more towards
very significant
like
changes
southern
to
Ontario,
ailments.
near Michigan.
Firstly, let's discuss the broad changes
So we already
to
had
ailment application
already had mine
and
as
the
well.
damage
But I
dealt
do
by
both.
ailments.
I'm kind of dual
In POE2,
citizenship.
you won't be able to
So I
invest
celebrate
into
both
modifiers
Thanksgivings.
which grant you
Lots
a
of football on tomorrow if you watch
percentage-based
football,
chance to
so
inflict
it's always
a
good.
specific ailment like you can in POE1. At the same time, critical strikes in POE2 will no longer guarantee the application of elemental ailments. So, how do you inflict ailments? Well, the chance to inflict ailments and the damage that they deal in POE2 will now be based on the hit of damage received on the defender's side prior to the mitigation stage. This is different from the calculation of damage for ailments in POE1, where that damage is instead derived on the attacker's side of the calculation from the base damage of the hit. If you're interested, you can check out the full order of operations for the damage calculation in this video that I made on the topic right here. Now, this change is important for a few reasons. Firstly, since the chance to inflict an ailment is
you guys are
based on
both
the
Canadian?
damage
Hell
of
yeah.
the hit, you
More
now
Canadians,
care
the
about
better.
scaling the hit
Hell
damage
yeah.
to help ensure that you can apply that ailment. This is something that
But I like both. I like being really close to the border here. I go over to the States all the time.
It's
actually closer for me to go to the Detroit airport than Toronto.
Less hit damage doesn't impact the damage dealt by the inflicted ailment. Secondly, because the damage dealt by the ailment
Got some fellow
POE2
Canadians
is based
in here.
and scaled by the hit of damage prior to mitigation, damage modifiers will no longer directly apply to the ailment like they do in POE1. This means that in POE2, you're actively incentivized to scale the hit damage, not only to improve your chance of inflicting the ailment, but also to deal damage with it. Now, even though the hit damage prior to mitigation is what will determine the chance to inflict an ailment, you can still invest into modifiers that will help you inflict an ailment, but they work a bit differently. The ignition support is a great example. This one makes supported skills have 50% more chance to ignite. This can be seen as being somewhat similar to the mechanic in POE1 which exists on modifiers that allow you to inflict an ailment as though you were dealing more damage. Only this instead improves your chance to inflict the ailment as though you were dealing more damage. This is because the hit damage first determines the chance to inflict the ailment, and the modifier on the ignition support then acts as a multiplier for that number. In addition to being able to improve your chances of inflicting an ailment, you'll also be able to scale the ailment damage directly with a new type of modifier which only exists for some non-damaging ailments in POE1, Ailment Effect. In POE2, you'll be able to make use of Ailment Effect modifiers for damaging ailments to scale the ailment damage directly, such as this Frostfire support gem which makes ignites inflicted by supported skills
This Frostfire looks nuts
more
too.
effect against frozen enemies. This modifier would essentially double
I'm your
the
neighbor.
base effectiveness of Ignite,
Yeah, nice
from
try.
dealing 90% of
Nice
hit damage
try.
per second
Funny
up
guy.
to 180%. Aside from hit damage modifiers naturally scaling ailment damage in POE2, there are two other important mechanics that will also affect damaging ailments in POE2: critical strikes and double or triple damage. These mechanics are calculated prior to mitigation and directly scale the hit damage, and therefore they will improve the chance to inflict an ailment and the damage that that ailment deals. Keep in mind that the 50% dot multi for ailments applied by critical strikes in POE1 will no longer exist in POE2, and as previously mentioned, critical strikes will no longer guarantee elemental ailment application. In Path of Exile 2, there will also be changes to the default behavior of specific ailments. Bleeding can now only be inflicted with a hit that deals damage to life. A hit that's fully absorbed by Energy Shield or another resource won't be able to inflict bleeding. Additionally, the damage dealt by bleeding will fully bypass Energy Shield. Interestingly, this means that the Chaos Inoculation Keystone will make a character immune to bleeding. In POE2, poison will not stack by default, but you will be able to invest into additional poisons such as this multiple poison support. Like bleeding, poison will also bypass Energy Shield, which is already true in POE1 since it deals chaos damage. However, this will be an ailment-specific stat in POE2 because non-poison chaos damage will no longer bypass Energy Shield and will instead remove twice as much from this resource.
Alright, let's check on Energy Shield.
Welcome to
If anybody wants to know how Energy Shield works for POE2,
POE2's early access is
with Path of Exile 2, it's very important to focus on your defenses. You have armor, your elemental resistances, energy shield. And then there's another side of defense, but you want to mainly focus on those as a primary thing before your damage.
From the same mechanics in POE.
Because if you don't kind of hit the cap on your resistances, then you're going to have a really hard time in end game trying to stay alive, like especially against bosses. So that's something I'll be making sure I focus on myself as well. But that's where it's different from Diablo. So you're always focused on damage numbers and damage. So you don't have to worry about as much on the defensive side. But with Path of Exile 2, it's very important.
POE1. To create a resource that's useful for
this will give you an idea how Energy Shield works.
You can check out the full series by following the link in the video description below. This video is all about Energy Shield. Let's get into it.
I've seen that scepter, yeah.
Energy Shield is a defensive stat in Path of Exile. By default, Energy Shield provides an additional pool of hit points that protects life. Any damage that would be taken from life is instead taken from Energy Shield first, with the exception of Chaos damage, which fully bypasses Energy Shield. However, there are many mechanics such as Shavron's Wrappings or the Coruscating Elixir, which stop Chaos damage from bypassing Energy Shield. Energy Shield Recharge
so 380 is max spirit.
Energy Shield over time at a base rate of
unless if you can get more on tree. Okay.
Per second. But it only starts after no damage is taken from Energy Shield or the resource that Energy Shield is protecting for a period of 2 seconds. Energy Shield Recharge is interrupted if any damage is taken to Energy Shield or the resource that it's protecting.
On how to stack a very specific mod and might
is not stopped
give benefits
upon full Energy Shield. Or if the loss of resources occurs from non-damage sources such as spending life with life tap support.
That's going to be the biggest thing.
Battery Keystone can make Energy Shield protect
using a
mana
Pacific mod,
life, causing the character to spend Energy Shield before mana for skill costs. Mind Over Matter can then be used in combination with Eldritch Battery, causing damage that is redirected to mana to be taken from Energy Shield first. Energy Shield also has an inherent stun prevention mechanic. When a character takes damage from a hit while they have Energy Shield, unless they're also using Eldritch Battery, they'll have a 50% chance to ignore being stunned by that hit. This stun prevention mechanic is entirely independent from other sources of stun avoidance and is rolled separately. The Chaos Inoculation Keystone can be used to make a character immune to Chaos damage at the cost of losing all but 1 life, making Energy Shield the primary resource pool for absorbing damage. Now, Path of Exile 2 is making some significant changes to core Energy Shield mechanics, and this is mostly in regards to which damage types bypass this resource. In POE2, Chaos damage will no longer bypass Energy Shield by default unless it is specifically Chaos damage coming from the poison ailment. Any non-poison Chaos damage will instead remove twice as much Energy Shield after the mitigation calculation. Physical damage from the bleeding ailment will also bypass Energy Shield. However, bleeding can only be inflicted by a hit which deals damage directly to life. Therefore, the Chaos Inoculation Keystone, which is currently planned to be the same as it was in POE1, will provide immunity to bleeding as a hit can never deal damage to life to be able to apply the ailment.
That's a good little tidbit for Energy Shield. Here's
Welcome
mechanics
to
for invasion.
Path of Exile 2 mechanics video. POE2's early access will now launch on December 6th, and in this series I'm covering Path of Exile 2's mechanics, discussing how they function and how they differ from the same mechanics in Path of Exile 1 to create a resource that's useful for new players and veterans alike. You can check out the full series by following the link in the video description below. This video is about evasion. Let's get into it.
Solar Amulet. Dang, dude. I did hear amulets do have spirit, yes.
Evasion rating is a core defensive stat in Path of Exile which is used to calculate a character's chance to evade incoming attacks. This is done using a formula that weighs the character's evasion rating against a monster's accuracy rating to determine their chance to evade. A character's chance to evade is capped at 95%. But evasion isn't a purely chance-based system, because there is also a secondary mechanic known as entropy. Entropy is a system that's designed to ensure there are no long strings of hits or evades by chance.
Every act has a...
When an attack is initiated and that attack
Okay,
is
so
reversed
total
in at least
180,
136
gotcha.
or approximately 3.33 seconds, an entropy value is randomly rolled between 0 and 99. The attacker's chance to hit is added to this value. If entropy exceeds 100 after the attacker's chance to hit has been added, the attack will hit, and 100 is subtracted from the entropy value. If the entropy value remains below 100 after the attacker's chance to hit has been added, the attack is evaded and the entropy value remains intact. Importantly, entropy is a character stat, thus the same entropy value is shared across all monsters attacking the character. This system guarantees that evasion is less of a random defensive mechanic and more reliable in being able to evade over long strings of incoming hits. But in Path of Exile 2, the type of hits that a character can evade is changing. This is because monsters will no longer have a distinction between using attacks and spells in regards to a character's defenses. I'll link the full video on this topic in the series here. In Path of Exile 2, by default, a character will be able to evade any incoming projectile or strike. It doesn't matter if that projectile is an arrow fired by a monster's attack, or a fireball from a monster casting a spell. As long as the hit is a projectile, or a strike such as a monster swinging their sword towards you in melee range, you'll be able to evade that hit. However, a character will not be able to evade area of effect hits by default, such as larger slam abilities used by bosses. Now, this change will mean that any hit coming from a monster that the character can evade will use the monster's accuracy rating in order to calculate their chance to hit the character. So, monster abilities that were spells in POE1, like a fireball for example, will use the monster's accuracy rating to determine their hit chance. This is very important due to another change in Path of Exile 2 which makes accuracy less effective at a distance. The further away an entity is from their target, the higher the penalty they'll have on their accuracy rating, making it harder to hit the target when at a great distance away from them. This will mean that a character will not only be able to evade all types of projectiles, but their positioning and distance from monsters targeting them is an important factor to consider from a gameplay perspective. This will make evasion a stronger defensive stat against ranged monsters, especially on ranged characters that are already naturally maintaining a distance. Now, even though area of effect hits cannot be evaded by default, there is a keystone that exists to be able to change this. In Path of Exile 2, the Acrobatics keystone will make it so that all hits can be evaded, including those that previously couldn't be, such as area of effect abilities, at the cost of a 50% reduction to the character's evasion rating. The wording on this one may be a bit off. For example, it could be 50% less evasion rating, and of course, this keystone and pretty much everything else is subject to change. But the concept of this keystone is that you need to invest a lot more to obtain a decent amount of evasion rating, but in exchange, evasion becomes a lot more reliable as a defensive tool.
That's good. Good on evasion, so it gives you kind of like a basic idea there as well. And this is another big one for mechanics ability usage. This is actually very helpful.
Welcome to another Path of Exile 2 mechanics video. In this series, on the run-up to Path of Exile 2's early access launch on November 15th, I'm covering Path of Exile 2's mechanics, looking at how they function and how they differ from the same mechanics in Path of Exile 1, to create a resource that's useful for new players and veterans alike. You can check out the full series by following the link in the video description below. This video is about a collection of changes revolving around ability usage. Let's get into it. One of the biggest reasons that Grinding Gear Games took on the task of creating a new game in Path of Exile 2 is that they wanted to make an ARPG which solved a lot of the things that the original Path of Exile always struggled with. And at the top of that list is visceral combat, especially in regards to melee. Path of Exile 2 has an extremely heavy focus on the feel of moment-to-moment combat, with a new rigging system to aid with animation that allows character movement to seamlessly flow from one skill usage to the next. In Path of Exile 2, you can retarget an ability during its animation, allowing your character to turn during the cast or attack time prior to going off. Skills that have longer animations would allow the character more room for adjustment, which will mean that more mobile targets can still be tracked and hit with skills that have much longer wind-ups. Ability use can be manually cancelled if you need to move out of the way of immediate danger, for example, or if you just no longer need to use that skill. This can be done forcibly by dodge rolling. Now, the cancelling of abilities will likely be something that's much more important in POE2 compared to POE1, because skills typically have longer cast times than those we're used to in POE1. For example, the Arc spell, which has a 0.9 second cast time in POE2 compared to the 0.7 second cast time in POE1. But there are also several much stronger abilities which have very
a little bit longer for your cast time,
like Comet, which has a 1 second base cast time with an additional 1 second to total cast time as a modifier on the gem itself that likely scales with gem levels. Being able to cancel a skill with such a long cast time will be crucial to maintaining that freedom and fluidity of moment-to-moment combat. But what about the mana cost of a skill? In POE1, if you cancel or are forced to cancel a skill's animation before it goes off, such as being stunned out of that cast, you'll lose the resource cost of the skill since it's spent up front. But resource cost for ability use is also changing in a big way from POE1 to POE2. The cost of using a skill will no longer be spent up front upon first activating this skill, and will instead be spent over the full duration of the skill's animation, meaning that cancelling a skill before it goes off, either manually or having the skill forcibly cancelled by being stunned, is significantly less punishing. The option to retarget and cancel skill usage without losing resources should go a long way to provide the basis for smoother feeling combat. But these are not the only changes to ability usage that Path of Exile 2 is bringing to the franchise, because many skills will now either have a movement function built in by default, or will be able to be used while moving. Skills that can be used while moving will typically impose a movement penalty upon the character during their cast time, slowing movement speed down but not stopping it entirely. Meanwhile, for skills which do require you to stand in place, some of them have built-in movement. Going back to the Comet spell from earlier, this one has a movement portion of the skill which only activates if the spell is targeted close to the character, lifting the character up and repositioning them backwards slightly without turning around, providing some defensive utility to help maintaining distance during casting. There are also skills which act similarly to movement skills in POE1, such as the new Hand of Chiola skill. This one dashes to the target if they're at distance from you when it's used. Now lastly for this video, for the general ability use changes, is something a bit more cosmetic to do with the new rigging system in POE2. Some of you who have played POE1 may be familiar with the cast or attack animations of specific classes and specific weapon types, and how those animations tend to start looking a little bit ridiculous once you start to stack a lot of attack and cast speed, or a lot of action
every
speed.
time I shock an enemy, it gives me 2 mana
animation in
over,
POE1 never changes, it just gets
over
sped
not
up.
4, but
To the
6
point where an
seconds.
animation which looks fine when it's played over the duration
Yeah,
of a
2 mana
second,
per second.
begins to look quite strange
Or
once it's
seconds
played
when a
10
supported
times
skill
in the
shocks
space
an
of a
enemy.
second. But in POE2, the animation of a skill's usage is planned to be different based on the speed of that animation, with parts of the animation being changed for a faster or slower variant of the animation when certain speed thresholds are met.
Okay. So that is on abilities. And then, yeah, so that, what is it kind of getting into here? This was abilities. We went over Active block is another one that's actually very
Welcome.
important here.
Welcome to another Path of Exile 2 mechanics video. In this series, on the run-up to Path of Exile 2's early access launch on November 15th, I'm covering Path of Exile 2's mechanics and taking a look at how they function and how they differ from the same mechanics in Path of Exile 1, to create a resource that is useful for new players and veterans alike. You can check out the full series by following the link in the video description below. This video is all about active block. Let's get into it. Active block is a brand new mechanic in Path of Exile 2. It doesn't exist in Path of Exile 1. The ability to use active block is granted by the Raise Shield skill, which comes as an implicit on some shield bases. This appears to primarily exist on strength shield bases, including some hybrid strength bases such as this one right here. Using the Raise Shield skill brings
for sure you can test it prior to ascending,
and will block any incoming projectiles or strikes from the front. Any hits coming in from the sides of the character or the back will not be blocked by this active block mechanic. Now, it's worth mentioning here that block in POE2 is going to work a bit differently from POE1 in terms of the types of hits you'll be able to block. Firstly, the categorization of monster attacks or monster spells is going away in POE2. There will simply just be monster hits. Block, similarly to evasion, will be able to block incoming projectiles such as fireballs, or strikes such as a sword swing, but it won't be able to block larger area effect hits such as large boss slams coming from above the character or underneath the ground where the character stands. These larger abilities will be telegraphed as unblockable. For a bit more information on the removal of monster attack and spell categorization, you can check out the full video on that topic right here. Now, this change should go a long way to making it much easier to understand which hits can be blocked and which can't. And this is a massive change compared to POE1, where it's almost impossible to tell if an incoming ability is an attack or a spell without having prior knowledge. And it makes sense too. If you're holding your shield up in front of you, you can block an incoming projectile, whether that's a fireball or an arrow. That doesn't really matter, but if the ground beneath you is literally crumbling away, your shield isn't going to be too much help in that scenario. So when using Raise Shield, a character's shield will be up in front of them and they will have a heavy movement speed penalty imposed on them whilst they maintain active block. There will also be an endurance bar which will deplete over time as hits are blocked and restore slowly while not using Raise Shield. If this endurance bar ever reaches 0 while using Raise Shield, the character will immediately fall out of active block and be stunned. So it's quite important to pay attention to that bar, as it can be extremely punishing if you hit empty. Now, Raise Shield being an active skill means that like any other skill, it can be supported using support gems. Some examples of support gems you could use with Raise Shield are Energy Barrier, which forces Energy Shield recharge to begin if you get
immediately
stunned while using the supported skill, and stops damage from preventing the recharge for 2 seconds. Remember, you can still be stunned while using Raise Shield, for example from an area hit, or a hit that comes in from the sides or behind you. Unbreakable is another support gem that would help out with that, making it much harder for you to be stunned while using the supported skill by providing more stun threshold. There's also Wind Wave, which provides a defensive knockback utility if you do get stunned while using the supported skill. On top of support gems, there are some other abilities that will interact with active block. We know of at least one of them right now, Magma Barrier. This is a persistent buff ability that reserves Spirit. Magma Barrier will reward good timing of using Raise Shield. If you use the ability right as a hit comes in and block it during a 0.25 second window, Magma Barrier will deal damage to the attacker and enemies near them, whilst also providing you with an endurance charge. You can see Magma Barrier in action here. Now finally for this video, I should mention that passive block does still seem to exist in POE2, as seen by the chance to block stats that are found on most shields. From what we've heard in interviews, the devs have just discussed some topics about block and not specifically active or passive block, so passive block should follow the same rules as active block in POE2, in that only projectiles and strikes are blockable by default. And so there should only be one chance to block stat, since there's no distinction between monster attacks or spells. We're not sure yet if there will be any connection between passive block and active block. For example, we don't know if you'll be able to passively block while you're using Raise Shield to benefit from active block. One would think that passive block may be disabled during active block as you're focusing your shield on the front, but we'll have to wait until November 15th to find out for sure. Getting straight into it with some mana leech notables. Firstly, Siphon, which is located very
This is
close to the Monk's
just some
Heart.
passive skills if you're
Siphon
looking
makes you
into
recover 2% of
mana
mana
leeching.
on kill and increases the amount of mana leached by 25%. There's also Manifold Method, which is found closer to the edge of the tree. This one grants 50% increased amount of mana leached and increases your chance to inflict ailments against rares and uniques. Now, I wanted to highlight these two nodes because they're going to be incredibly powerful with the Acolyte of Chayula Monk Ascendancy, which makes Mana Leech instant and has a node which will recover Energy Shield based on mana leached. So these two notables will massively improve the amount of mana you'll leech per hit, which will in turn lead to a lot more instant recovery for both mana and Energy Shield if you have both Ravenous Doubts and Consuming Questions. The 2% mana recovery on kill is also very powerful if you're intending to use Mind Over Matter, as this form of recovery and the mana leech with Ravenous Doubts are both instant, which bypasses the less recovery rate downside on MOM. Next up, Briny Carapace, 60% increased stun threshold for each time you've been stunned recently. This node is going to be a really nice defensive measure to have to help prevent your character from being chain stunned. Stun threshold is based on maximum life, but there are several notables around the intelligence area of the tree which help to improve the stun threshold for energy shield or hybrid builds, and I think this node will be really nice to have early on in progression before you find a better solution to stun. Okay, here's a couple of poison nodes. Building Toxins found on the edge of the tree, which grants an extra poison stack but reduces poison duration by 25%, and Escalating Toxins, which is right next door, providing 10% increased poison duration per poison inflicted recently, up to 100%. Now, in the context of PoE1, Escalating Toxins is obviously ridiculously strong, but for how PoE2 is changing poisons, it's not nearly as good. In a mapping setting, you should be able to reach the maximum duration on the node quite often as long as you're inflicting poisons on monsters fast enough, but that may not be all that useful. Where it matters more is on single target, where you'll need to not only be inflicting poisons quickly, but to benefit the most from the increased duration, you'll want to be able to inflict as many poisons as possible, and we currently don't have all of the information for how many stacks one may be able to achieve to be able to judge just how good this node might be. I believe we've seen 3 or 4 sources of additional poison stacks, which all have their own downsides. While the Pathfinder can double that total at the cost of a less duration modifier, this one is going to be a wait and see for me. Next we have Slippery Ice. This is a cool one. 25% reduced effect of chill on you, unaffected by chill while dodge rolling. So we know that dodge rolling will cover the same amount of distance across the full duration of the roll that would have been covered by walking normally, but this node will allow your dodge roll to be much more effective while chilled. Not only for moving, but also for getting out of the way of dangerous AoEs where walking out of them would otherwise be slower due to the chill. Inner Faith is located close to the outer edge, 20% increased evasion rating, 20% increased maximum ES, and 25% reduced effective curses on you. This is just a really solid node to be picked up on any character scaling energy shield and evasion, as it just grants a bunch of useful stats. Dark Entries is another node located on the outer edge, and again, I don't have too much to say about this one other than it just being a really good node. +1 to the level of all chaos skills. The 4 small nodes leading up to it may make this one a favourable anoint for builds that want it. The Eternal Youth keystone is changed from POE1 and it finds itself on the opposite side of the passive tree. It still makes Energy Shield Recharge apply to life instead, but also makes recovery from your life flask apply to Energy Shield instead. Now, one interesting thing I'm noticing on the passive tree for POE2 is that options for Energy Shield recovery are extremely limited compared to POE1. For example, in the version
Bosses
of
look like a
POE2
lot
I
of fun.
played in LA, there was no
I like this
Ghost
one.
Reaver keystone on the tree,
Looks pretty cool.
and I didn't see any nodes for Energy Shield Leech. And I think this is very deliberate, as there's a lot more nodes to invest in to scale Energy Shield Recharge instead. However, Eternal Youth provides an alternative for ES recovery using your Life Flask, as there's a decent amount of notables in the area that grant Life Flask charges over time, and some that grant a chance to not spend any flask charges too. Next is another keystone, Resonance, which makes you gain a certain type of charge instead of another. Power instead of Frenzy, Frenzy instead of Endurance, and Endurance instead of Power. This one will enable some builds to be able to use or boost the use of skills that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do before, and keep in mind that charges in POE2 do not have any inherent bonuses like they do in POE1. Wild Storm is another very strong notable located.
Yeah, that's a big one.
towards the outer
15%
edge
more
of the
maximum
tree.
lightning damage.
15% more maximum lightning
That's going to be
damage.
good.
Since
Your,
lightning damage modifiers typically have low minimum and high maximum damage ranges,
And that's good for any
this one
builds,
is
really,
great to
or any
boost that
class, sorry.
maximum damage range even further and improve the average damage roll. Okay, check out this notable. Spaghettification. This one is
Yeah,
crazy.
I keep seeing this one all over the
move
place.
speed,
I see this node is like, I don't know, it's just crazy. Like 3% increased movement speed, 29% increased chaos damage. And obviously minus 13% to chaos resistance, but 23% reduced light radius. And then 7% increased attributes. That's huge. It's actually a very good one. So that one's kind of located in the middle, obviously with the Sorks and Witch abilities. That's kind of like your top of the pie shape of the skill tree.
29% increased chaos damage, minus 13% chaos resistance, 23% reduced light radius, and 7% increased attributes. This is just a really, really strong node for any chaos damage build. The light radius modifier is going to be somewhat annoying, and you'll need to overcome the chaos resistance downside too, but the rest of the stats gained are just incredibly useful in pretty much any build utilizing chaos damage. I expect to see this one getting picked up a lot. Alright, the best nodes are saved till last, and there's 4 of them. Let's start with Energize, located on the outer edge of the tree. 35% chance for trigger skills to refund half of energy spent. So the energy mechanic is a system tied to some trigger-based meta gems which reserve spirit, and these gems will gain energy whenever a condition is met. For example, Cast on Shock gains energy upon shocking an enemy. Once enough energy is reached, the socketed spell is triggered and energy is fully depleted. But this node will provide a chance to retain some of that energy so that the next trigger goes off sooner. The value of this notable goes up massively the more energy gems you're using. One with the Storm is a Quarterstaff notable found on the outer edge of the tree, which makes Quarterstaff skills which consume power charges count as consuming an additional charge. Flicker Strike, anyone? Okay,
yeah, exactly.
lastly,
Flicker Strike.
nodes. Yes,
I can see that for sure with that.
Trickster is back in POE2, well, not as an Ascendancy, but in Spirit. Spectral Ward grants +1 to maximum ES per 12 evasion on your equipped body armor, while Subterfuge Mask grants +2 evasion per 1 maximum ES on your equipped helmet. We currently have no idea about the scaling we're going to have access to on endgame bases. For example, how much armor or evasion or ES will they provide at the top end, and how high can any local modifiers scale up to? Regardless, I expect to see a lot of monk builds taking these nodes. And that's it, some of the interesting nodes and
those
builds taking these nodes.
Okay, so that was Spectral Ward. +1 to maximum energy shield per 12 evasion. Rating on equipped body armor. +2 evasion. Rating per 1 maximum energy shield. Yeah, so both those definitely be good for Monk, if that's where you're going.
And that's it. Some of the interesting nodes in the
Very good nodes
portion of the tree. If you've liked this video and you want to see more of other parts of the tree, make sure to subscribe, as I'll be putting out more videos like this in the time between now and launch. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.
Very informative information. So that's from Dreamcore. If you check him out on YouTube, he's got tons. He's actually the one spilling a lot of the nodes to everybody, other content creators, and he got a lot of information when he was at the LA event for, game test of Path of Exile 2. This was kind of back in the summer there. So he actually got a lot of footage. So he's showing a lot of the nodes, and he just has overall very good information on a lot of the classes and the nodes as well, with their skills, ascendancies, etc. And just a lot of the fundamentals, how the game works for endgame. And if you're curious on like other game mechanics, he's got everything in there. It's very useful information. And then this is also a nice site for anybody interested in checking it out. That just kind of like shows you how you can kind of look at how you're going to customize your build for whatever class you choose. So you can put in a lot of the the skills and the support gems. So your skills, you just kind of look for what say you're a Sork. Here's Arc. Then it can kind of just give you information if you're looking for it. Very helpful. Great build planner. And then this site is very good as well if you guys are just looking for general information on a lot of these skills per character. Just kind of go under gems, and then it will show you like all your support gems, spear gems, skill gems. Then the classes, if you're looking at say you want to go Monk, just shows you a lot of the Monk skills and what they do. This gives you a little bit of an idea going in, so you're not completely blind going into launch, and you can have a bit of an idea of maybe what route you would like to go with your class before you hit your ascension. It's a very useful tools. But on that note, I'm going to call it here. It's almost 11. So I will be back on tomorrow. I'm going to stream for a little bit. It is the American Thanksgiving, so anybody in the States as well, hope you have a good Thanksgiving. Good vibes. Everybody be safe, eat good. And don't forget, this Saturday, November 30th, I'm going to start the early access key giveaway. If anybody's interested in that, tune into the channel. Please follow, and check out my other socials. I have lots of other information and helpful tips before you jump into the game December 6th. And launch time is at 2 p.m. on December 6th, and that's Eastern time though. So we'll start the giveaway this Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern, and we'll wrap it up and announce the winner at 2 p.m. Eastern. I have a giveaway bot that'll generate and pick a random winner. You guys will see that. So I'll be fair, and then on launch, I'll do another early access key giveaway, probably around launch time. So maybe we'll do it again at 12 p.m. kind of thing, a couple hours before launch, but I'll announce that sooner. But anybody, yeah, so just everybody have a good Thanksgiving tomorrow, and we'll check you on the next stream. Everybody have a good night and take care. Be safe. Cheers. GG's.
Yeah. Unknown Brain, Marvin Devine. I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming, it's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
I know that I gotta stay away from all your games, yeah. I know that I found somebody else to love me one day, yeah. You'll realize the grass ain't greener on the other side, no. You did me dirty for the last time, so now I gotta say goodbye. So now I gotta say
Yeah, my life is lovely now, I'm focused on me. You said you were about to die, I guess the car is on E. But see, I ain't even tripping, cause I just chose to believe that somebody gon' come around and give me just what I need. I don't wanna see you finding, see you looking down and out, coming to me crying, saying you miss having me around. Gave you chances and you blew it,